I never thought a casual family dinner conversation about summer plans would end with me discovering a secret group chat, planning a 2-week European vacation that deliberately excluded me while using my credit cards to fund the entire trip. Even less could I have anticipated the look of pure terror on my sister Madison's face when she realized I had just canceled every single card they were counting on while they stood in the Rome Airport departure lounge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But that moment of crystalline clarity, watching my family's carefully constructed facade crumble in real time through frantic phone calls and panicked text messages, became the turning point that transformed me from the family's invisible financial safety net into someone who finally understood the difference between being generous and being used. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk about summer plans," my mother Linda announced with that particular tone she used when she was about to assign me some new responsibility disguised as a family discussion. The Sunday dinner table at my parents' sprawling, colonial home in Westchester felt unusually tense, though I couldn't quite identify why. My father Robert sat at the head of the mahogany table, methodically cutting his prime rib with the precision he brought to everything in his life as a senior partner at Morrison Associates. My older sister Madison picked at her salad while scrolling through her phone with barely concealed impatience, and my younger brother Tyler was absorbed in what appeared to be a heated text conversation. I had driven up from Manhattan after another exhausting week, managing digital marketing campaigns for 3 different startups, looking forward to our traditional family dinner, and maybe some actual conversation for once. Instead, the atmosphere felt charged with unspoken agenda, items and careful glances between family members that didn't include me. "You know how important these family traditions are, especially now that Dad's thinking about retirement," Mom continued, her perfectly manicured fingers adjusting the fresh flowers she'd arranged in the crystal vase centerpiece. "We really should plan something special this summer, something memorable that brings us all together." I nodded enthusiastically, immediately thinking about potential destinations and activities we could enjoy as a family. It had been almost 2 years since we'd taken a real vacation together, and with my marketing business finally generating steady income, I was actually in a position to contribute significantly to family experiences in ways I couldn't during my struggling freelancer years. "What did you have in mind, Mom?" I asked, setting down my wine glass and leaning forward with genuine interest. "I've been researching some amazing family-friendly destinations in Costa Rica, or we could do something cultural in Europe if everyone's interested in museums and historical sites." Madison finally looked up from her phone, exchanging a quick glance with Tyler that I almost missed. "Oh, Sarah, that sounds lovely. But we were thinking of something a bit more intimate this year. You know how complicated group travel can get when everyone has different preferences and schedules." I felt a small flutter of confusion but pushed it aside, assuming she meant we should plan something more low-key than the elaborate family reunions we'd organized in previous years. "That makes sense. What were you thinking? Maybe a long weekend somewhere closer to home? The Hamptons could be nice, or we could rent a house in the Berkshires." "Actually, honey," Dad interjected, his lawyer voice taking on that carefully measured tone he used during difficult negotiations. "Your mother and I have been discussing this with Madison and Tyler, and we think it might be best if this year's trip focused on the immediate family. You understand how it is with the business transition and everything happening with Tyler's college plans." The words hit me like a physical blow, though I tried to maintain my composure while processing what he'd actually said. Immediate family. As if I weren't sitting right there at the table where I'd eaten Sunday dinner almost every week for the past 5 years since moving back to New York. As if I weren't their daughter, their sister, their family member who had consistently shown up for every holiday, birthday, graduation, and family crisis without question. "I'm sorry. I'm not sure I understand," I said carefully, looking around the table at faces that suddenly seemed to be avoiding direct eye contact. "Are you saying you're planning a family vacation without me?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair, finally putting his phone down and looking genuinely uncomfortable for the first time during the evening. "It's not like that, Sarah. It's just that Mom and Dad wanted to do something special before I start my senior year. And Madison's schedule is so crazy with her new promotion. And you're always so busy with your clients and everything." The rationalization felt weak even as he delivered it, clearly rehearsed but not entirely convincing even to him. I studied my brother's face, remembering how we'd stayed up countless nights during his high school years talking about his college anxieties and future plans, how I'd helped him write application essays and drove him to campus visits when our parents were too busy with work obligations. "So you're saying this family vacation would be more successful without the family member who has literally never missed a family event in 5 years?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the growing hurt and confusion. "The family member who reorganized her entire client schedule last Christmas to make sure she could spend 3 full days here because family traditions were so important?" Mom's expression shifted into what I recognized as her conflict management mode, the same diplomatic approach she used when mediating disputes at the nonprofit where she served as executive director. "Sarah, darling, you're taking this too personally. It's not about excluding you. It's about recognizing that different family configurations work better for different types of experiences. Different family configurations." The phrase felt like corporate speak designed to make exclusion sound like strategic planning. I looked around the table again, noting the way Madison was now checking her phone with renewed intensity and how Dad had returned to methodically, eating his dinner as if this conversation were completely routine. "Where exactly are you planning to go for this intimate family experience?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the emotional turbulence building inside me. "We're still finalizing details," Mom replied quickly, too quickly. "Something relaxing and restorative. You know how important it is for your father to decompress before the partnership transition." Madison looked up sharply at that response, shooting Mom a warning glance that confirmed my growing suspicion that there were significant details being deliberately withheld from this conversation. The family that had always prided itself on open communication and collective decision-making was clearly operating with information I wasn't privy to. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of stilted conversation and careful topic changes whenever I attempted to return to the vacation discussion. By the time I gathered my purse and keys to drive back to the city, I felt emotionally drained and thoroughly confused about what had just transpired. The family that had consistently emphasized my importance in their lives had just casually informed me that I wasn't important enough to include in their summer plans. During the hour drive back to my apartment in Chelsea, I replayed every interaction from the evening, searching for clues I might have missed about the underlying dynamics. Had there been previous conversations about my inclusion that I wasn't aware of? Had I somehow indicated that I wouldn't be interested in a family vacation? Had my recent focus on building my business been interpreted as disinterest in family activities? By the time I reached my apartment, I had convinced myself that I must have misunderstood something fundamental about the situation. My family wasn't cruel or deliberately exclusive. There had to be a reasonable explanation for what felt like deliberate rejection. Over the next few days, I found myself checking my phone constantly for follow-up messages about the vacation plans, expecting clarification or perhaps an invitation once they'd worked out whatever logistical concerns had prompted the initial exclusion. Instead, I received the usual family group text messages about routine matters, reminders about upcoming birthdays, shared articles about topics of mutual interest, and casual updates about daily life. It was Thursday evening when I discovered the truth entirely by accident. Madison had sent what she thought was a private message to Tyler to our family group chat, a screenshot of an Airbnb listing in Tuscany with the caption, "Mom loved this one. Can't wait to try that cooking class. 2 weeks is going to be perfect." The message was deleted within 30 seconds, but I had already seen it clearly enough to understand exactly what kind of intimate family vacation was being planned without me. Not a simple weekend getaway or a modest domestic trip, but an elaborate 2-week European adventure that would cost significantly more than my entire quarterly business revenue. I stared at my phone screen long after the message disappeared, feeling a complex mixture of hurt, anger, and growing clarity about patterns I had been deliberately ignoring for years. This wasn't an impulsive decision or a simple oversight. This was a carefully planned exclusion that had required coordination and deliberate deception. The next morning, I called Madison directly, hoping for honest conversation about what was obviously a difficult family situation. When she answered, her voice carried the bright artificial cheerfulness she used when she was preparing to manage a complicated conversation. "Hey, Sarah. What's up?" "I'm actually running between meetings, but I have a few minutes. I saw your message last night, Madison. The one about the Tuscany rental and the cooking class." The silence that followed was long enough for me to hear traffic, noise in the background, and what sounded like Madison stepping into a quieter space. "Oh, that. Listen, Sarah, I know how this looks, but it's really not what you think. What I think is that you're planning a 2-week family vacation in Italy without me while letting me believe it was going to be some kind of simple local trip. What part of that am I misunderstanding?" Madison sighed, and I could practically hear her mental gears shifting as she formulated her response. "Look, this whole thing started as a conversation between Mom and Dad about doing something special for Tyler before college, and it just evolved from there. It's not personal, Sarah. It's more about family dynamics and making sure everyone can really relax and enjoy themselves. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Family dynamics. Another euphemism that seemed designed to make exclusion sound like thoughtful planning. And which family dynamics exactly make my presence problematic for relaxation and enjoyment? You know how you can be sometimes, Sarah. You're always working, always checking your phone for client emergencies, always worried about budget constraints. Mom and Dad wanted something where they could really unwind without having to coordinate around your business schedule or worry about whether you're comfortable with the expenses. The characterization stung because it contained just enough truth to be believable while completely misrepresenting my actual behavior and priorities. Yes, I worked hard to build my business. Yes, I was conscientious about financial planning, but I had never let work obligations interfere with family commitments, and I had never made anyone feel guilty about vacation expenses, even when money was tight for me personally. So the solution was to exclude me entirely rather than have a conversation about how to make the trip work for everyone? "It's not exclusion," Madison insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's just recognition that different trips work better for different people. Maybe you could plan your own vacation this summer, something that really fits your lifestyle and interests." After ending the call with Madison, I found myself staring out my apartment window at the busy Manhattan street below, watching people hurry past with their own complicated lives and family dramas. The hurt was real and substantial, but underneath it was a growing sense of clarity about patterns that extended far beyond this single vacation decision. I had spent years positioning myself as the family member who could be counted on for anything. Emergency loans when Madison was between jobs, help with Tyler's college application process when our parents were overwhelmed with work, coordination, of family events and gift-giving, and consistent emotional support during various family crises. I had taken pride in being reliable, generous, and accommodating, viewing these qualities as expressions of love and family commitment. But accommodation and reliability could apparently be taken for granted and ultimately used as justification for exclusion. The family member who never complained about plans could be excluded from planning. The sister who always found ways to make family events work with her schedule could be dismissed as too busy for family events. That evening, I did something I had never done before in 5 years of regular family communication. I muted the family group chat notifications and spent the weekend completely disconnected from the ongoing stream of messages, photos, and updates that usually provided constant connection to their daily lives. The silence was initially uncomfortable, like breaking a habitual pattern that had become unconscious routine. But as the weekend progressed, I began to notice how much mental and emotional energy I typically devoted to maintaining family connections, responding to messages, remembering important dates, and ensuring I remained informed about everyone's activities and concerns. By Monday morning, I had reached a decision that surprised me with its clarity and resolve. I wasn't going to argue about the vacation or try to convince my family to include me. Instead, I was going to pay attention to actions rather than words, patterns rather than explanations, and actual treatment rather than stated intentions. If my family wanted to treat me as optional while taking my support for granted, I was perfectly capable of becoming actually optional in ways they hadn't anticipated. The first step was gathering information about exactly what kind of European adventure was being planned with my apparent exclusion. I knew Madison well enough to predict that she would share details on social media, despite the family's attempt to keep the plans private from me. Sure enough, her Instagram stories over the next few days included screenshots of Italian restaurants, photos of luxury travel accessories, and excited messages about upcoming wine tastings and cultural experiences. Tyler was less discreet, posting TikTok videos about crazy family vacation planning and sharing content about European travel tips with obvious enthusiasm about upcoming plans. Even Dad, who rarely used social media, had been tagged in several posts by Mom about travel preparation and summer planning. The picture that emerged was of an elaborate, expensive vacation that would include luxury accommodations, multiple city visits, guided tours, and experiences that would cost significantly more than the simple family trip they had described to me. This wasn't a modest getaway designed for family bonding. This was a grand European adventure funded at a level that would require careful financial planning and considerable resources. Which brought me to the most interesting discovery of all. While researching their travel plans through social media, clues, I began paying closer attention to the family financial dynamics that I had previously accepted without much analysis. Madison's frequent posts about expensive restaurants, designer purchases, and luxury experiences, despite her recent complaints about being between paychecks. Tyler's casual mentions of spring break trips and summer plans that seemed well beyond what a college student could afford independently. Even my parents' lifestyle, which had gradually expanded over the past few years to include more frequent travel, home improvements, and expensive entertainment. I started thinking about the pattern of family financial emergencies I had helped resolve over the past several years. Madison's rent assistance when she was temporarily short between jobs. Tyler's emergency car repair fund when his transmission failed junior year. The family gift contributions I coordinated for Dad's birthday celebration last year. The shared expenses for Mom's surprise anniversary party that I had organized and largely funded. In each case, my assistance had been framed as temporary help during challenging circumstances, with promises of repayment or reciprocal support that somehow never materialized into actual financial exchanges. I had never tracked these contributions or requested formal repayment, viewing them as natural expressions of family support rather than loans or financial arrangements requiring documentation. But as I reviewed my bank statements and credit card records from the past 2 years, a pattern emerged that was both obvious and shocking in its scope. I had been functioning as the family's unofficial financial safety net for far longer, and to a much greater extent than I had consciously realized. The European vacation that excluded me was apparently being funded through resources that had been systematically supplemented by my contributions to family finances, contributions that had never been acknowledged as such or repaid as promised. They were planning to spend 2 weeks in luxury accommodations using financial capacity that had been enhanced by my support, while explicitly excluding me from the experience. That realization shifted my emotional response from hurt and confusion to something much clearer and more focused. This wasn't just about vacation exclusion. This was about being taken for granted in ways that extended far beyond a single family decision. and it was about financial patterns that needed immediate clarification. Wednesday afternoon, I received a group text from Mom with flight confirmation screenshots and excited messages about the upcoming departure for our wonderful family adventure. The message was clearly meant for the family group chat that excluded me, another accidental inclusion that revealed ongoing communication channels I wasn't part of. I screenshotted the flight information before it was deleted, noting departure dates, destination cities, and airline details that confirmed the scope and expense of their travel plans. Rome to Florence to Venice over 2 weeks, with premium accommodations and first-class flights that represented a vacation budget larger than my annual housing costs. That evening, I made a series of phone calls that I had been avoiding for several years. First, to my financial advisor, requesting a comprehensive review of my personal lending patterns and informal family financial arrangements. Second, to my accountant, asking for analysis of tax implications related to family financial support that had never been properly documented or repaid. The conversations were illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. Both professionals asked questions about financial boundaries and documentation that made me realize how casually I had approached what were actually significant monetary relationships with family members. Neither had intended to enable problematic dynamics, but both helped me understand that informal family lending without clear terms or repayment expectations could create exactly the kind of one-sided patterns I was experiencing. By Thursday, I had a clear picture of my financial relationship with my family over the past 3 years. The total amount of unreimbursed support, emergency assistance, and shared expenses I had covered exceeded $35,000. None of it had been formally documented as loans, but none of it had been repaid either, despite repeated promises and assurances that family financial support was temporary and would be reciprocated when circumstances improved. $35,000, more than enough to fund several European vacations for a family that had excluded me from their current European vacation, while planning to use financial capacity that I had helped create through years of unacknowledged support. The numbers provided clarity that emotions had been obscuring. This wasn't about hurt feelings or family misunderstandings. This was about establishing boundaries around being used financially while being excluded socially. And it was about ensuring that family relationships were based on genuine reciprocity rather than one-sided accommodation. Friday morning, I received another accidental group text, this one from Tyler showing boarding passes and excited messages about finally heading to the airport. The departure date was the following Monday, which meant I had exactly 3 days to implement the decision I had been considering all week. I spent Friday evening reviewing every credit card account, checking for authorized users and additional cardholders I had forgotten about during years of casual family financial accommodation. The discoveries were significant and comprehensive. Madison was an authorized user on 2 of my primary credit cards, arrangements that had been established during her temporary financial difficulties 3 years ago and never updated despite her improved employment situation. Tyler had emergency access to one of my travel cards, originally intended for college-related expenses, but apparently expanded to include general use over time. Even my parents had been added as authorized users on my primary business credit card during a family emergency 2 years ago, an arrangement that was supposed to be revoked after the immediate crisis was resolved. All told, my family had access to credit lines totaling over $60,000, access that had been granted during specific circumstances but had evolved into general family financial resources, without my conscious awareness or explicit approval. They had been functioning as a family financial unit that included my credit capacity, while making family decisions that excluded my actual participation. The pattern was clear, comprehensive, and completely unsustainable. I had been providing financial support while being denied family inclusion, covering emergency expenses while being excluded from family planning, and enabling luxury experiences while being deemed problematic for family relaxation. Saturday morning, I called each credit card company individually, identifying myself as the primary account holder and requesting immediate suspension of all authorized user privileges. The process was straightforward and took less than 2 hours to complete. By noon, every family member's access to my credit accounts had been revoked, and I had requested new primary cards with different numbers to prevent any continued use of previously shared account information. The timing was deliberate and precise. Their flight to Rome was scheduled for Monday morning. Their hotel reservations, restaurant bookings, tour guide arrangements, and transportation plans were all confirmed and approaching rapidly. Any financial disruptions would occur at the moment of maximum inconvenience and minimum alternative options. I spent the weekend feeling a complex mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and resolve. Part of me wondered if I was overreacting to what might have been thoughtless exclusion rather than malicious manipulation. But the larger part of me recognized that years of financial accommodation had enabled family dynamics that were fundamentally unhealthy and unsustainable. By Sunday evening, I felt calmer and more confident about my decision than I had about any family-related choice in years. I wasn't being vindictive or deliberately cruel. I was establishing boundaries around being used financially while being excluded socially, and I was ensuring that family relationships would need to be based on actual reciprocity rather than one-sided convenience. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, with the kind of uncertain weather that makes travel planning feel risky and complicated. I was reviewing client contracts at my kitchen table when my phone began buzzing with the first of what would become an avalanche of increasingly frantic family communications. The first call came at exactly 8:47 a.m. from Madison, her voice tight with barely controlled panic cutting through the ambient noise of what sounded like a busy airport terminal. "Sarah, thank God you answered. Something's wrong with my credit card. The airline is saying it's been declined for our luggage fees, and now they're threatening to remove our bags from the plane." I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching the rain streak down my kitchen window while considering how to respond to this first contact in what I knew would be a rapidly escalating series of crisis communications. "Good morning, Madison. How's the family vacation going so far?" "Sarah, this isn't the time for small talk. My card isn't working and we're supposed to board in 40 minutes. Can you call the credit card company and find out what's happening? There must be some kind of system error or fraud alert because I used it yesterday for dinner without any problems." The assumption that I would immediately jump into crisis management mode was so automatic and ingrained that Madison apparently hadn't even considered alternative explanations for the declined card. After years of training her family to expect my instant availability for financial emergencies, she was simply following the established pattern of calling Sarah to fix payment problems. "Which credit card are you trying to use?" I asked, maintaining a tone of helpful curiosity rather than revealing my complete awareness of the situation. "The Chase card, the one where you added me as an authorized user when I was having those employment transition issues. You know, my backup card for travel emergencies. The system is acting like the account doesn't exist anymore, which is obviously some kind of technical malfunction." Madison's confidence that this had to be a technical error rather than a deliberate action on my part revealed how completely she had internalized access to my financial resources as a permanent family entitlement, rather than temporary assistance during specific circumstances. The emergency access that had been granted 3 years ago had evolved in her mind into a standard family financial arrangement. "Actually, Madison, that's not a technical malfunction. I removed all authorized users from my credit accounts over the weekend. Your access to my cards was terminated on Saturday." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear boarding announcements echoing through the terminal in the background, and what sounded like Tyler asking someone about departure gate changes. When Madison finally spoke, her voice had shifted from panic to confusion with an undertone of growing anger. "You did what? Sarah, what are you talking about? Why would you remove my card access without warning, especially when you knew we were traveling today?" The genuine bewilderment in her voice confirmed what I had suspected about my family's perspective on our financial arrangements. They had become so accustomed to my financial support and credit access that the idea of me changing those arrangements Without consultation seemed unreasonable rather than recognizing that the arrangements themselves were one-sided and problematic. I'm talking about the fact that you've had access to my credit lines for 3 years beyond the original emergency that prompted it, while planning a family vacation that deliberately excluded me from participation, while apparently depending on my financial resources for funding. Madison's response came quickly, with the exasperated tone she used when she thought someone was being unnecessarily difficult about what should be simple practical matters. Sarah, those are completely separate issues. The card access is for emergencies and travel security, not for everyday expenses. And the vacation thing is complicated family dynamics that you're taking way too personally. Complicated family dynamics. The same euphemistic language that had been used to justify my exclusion from family planning while maintaining my inclusion in family financial support. I found myself appreciating the clarity that crisis situations provided for revealing underlying assumptions and expectations that usually remained hidden beneath polite family interactions. So, emergency access to my credit includes funding a 2-week European vacation that I'm not invited to participate in? We're not using your cards to pay for the vacation, Sarah. This is just travel security and unexpected expenses. Tyler's debit card got flagged for international use yesterday, and Dad's corporate card doesn't work for personal expenses, so we needed backup payment options for things like luggage fees and transportation. The rationalization was so smoothly delivered that I suspected Madison had convinced herself it was accurate, despite the fact that systematic access to my credit capacity was obviously integral to their ability to plan and execute an expensive international vacation without proper financial preparation. Emergency backup for unexpected expenses was still financial dependence, regardless of how it was categorized. Madison, how much total credit access did you and Tyler and Mom and Dad have through my accounts? I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head. Why does that matter right now? Sarah, we're about to miss our flight to Rome. Can you please just call Chase and restore my card access so we can deal with these practical issues? We can discuss family financial arrangements after we get back from vacation. The assumption that I would prioritize their travel convenience over addressing fundamental problems with our family financial dynamics was both predictable and revealing. Even in crisis situations, Madison's default expectation was that I would accommodate family needs rather than maintain boundaries around my own resources and decision-making authority. Actually, I won't be restoring anyone's access to my credit accounts. You'll need to handle your travel expenses using your own financial resources, just like any other adults planning an expensive international vacation. The sound of Madison dropping her phone was clearly audible, followed by muffled conversation that I couldn't make out clearly, but that sounded increasingly urgent and stressed. When she picked up the phone again, Tyler's voice was in the background asking what was happening with the cards, and I could hear Dad's deeper voice saying something about finding alternative payment methods. Sarah, you cannot be serious about this timing. Whatever point you're trying to make about family dynamics or financial boundaries can wait until we get back from this trip. We've been planning this vacation for months. Everything is already booked and confirmed, and you're creating a crisis that affects everyone over what should be a private conversation between us. The characterization of my boundary setting as crisis creation while minimizing their exclusion of me as a simple family dynamics issue was exactly the kind of perspective reversal I had come to expect from my family when their convenient arrangements were disrupted. My actions were characterized as unreasonable and poorly timed, while their actions were presented as normal family planning that shouldn't be questioned. Madison, let me make sure I understand the situation correctly. You planned a months-long European vacation that deliberately excluded me from participation. You made these plans while having access to my credit lines that total over $60,000. You're now at the airport trying to use my financial resources to fund travel, expenses for this vacation that I'm not invited to join. And you think the problematic behavior in this situation is my decision to revoke access to my own credit accounts? Put that way, I admit it sounds complicated, But you're not considering all the context about family relationships and how planning actually works with different people's schedules and preferences. Sarah, Mom is now crying in the terminal bathroom because she thinks you're trying to sabotage Dad's retirement celebration, and Tyler is panicking about having to call his college friends to borrow money for basic travel expenses. The emotional manipulation was as predictable as it was effective at triggering my well-trained family crisis management instincts. For years, any boundary I attempted to establish was met with descriptions of how my actions were causing emotional distress to other family members, shifting focus from the original issue to my responsibility for managing everyone else's emotional reactions to consequences of their own choices. I'm sorry Mom is upset, and I'm sorry Tyler is stressed about travel expenses. But those reactions are responses to discovering that your family vacation planning included assumptions about my financial support without my knowledge or consent, while excluding me from the vacation itself. Before Madison could respond, I heard Dad's voice much closer to the phone, apparently having taken it from her to handle what he probably viewed as a negotiation requiring his professional skills. Sarah, this is Dad. We need to resolve this situation immediately. I understand you're feeling excluded from family plans, and we can certainly discuss that, but right now, we have practical issues that need immediate solutions. His lawyer voice was in full deployment, attempting to establish control over the conversation by focusing on immediate practical problems rather than addressing underlying issues about family dynamics and financial boundaries. This was the same tactical approach he used in difficult business negotiations when he wanted to avoid addressing fundamental conflicts by concentrating on technical details and urgent deadlines. Hi, Dad. What practical solutions did you have in mind? First, we need you to restore credit access so we can complete our travel without further delays. Second, we can schedule a family meeting when we return to discuss any concerns you have about communication or planning processes. Third, we can look at adjusting future vacation planning to be more inclusive if that's important to you. The proposed solutions were carefully structured to prioritize their immediate convenience while offering vague future considerations for my concerns that could be easily minimized or forgotten after their travel crisis was resolved. The pattern was consistent with years of family conflict resolution that focused on getting me to accommodate immediate family needs with promises of later attention to my concerns that rarely materialized into actual changes. Dad, what specific steps have you taken to prepare financially for this European vacation? We've done extensive planning and budgeting, Sarah. The flights and accommodations are already paid for, and we have multiple payment methods available for additional expenses. This credit card issue is simply an unexpected technical complication that we need to resolve quickly. The evasive response confirmed my suspicion that their financial preparation had included assumptions about my credit access as backup funding, rather than comprehensive independent planning for all travel expenses. The multiple payment methods apparently included my financial resources without my explicit consent for this specific use. Which of those multiple payment methods are you currently able to access for luggage fees and immediate travel expenses? Another pause, followed by muffled conversation between my parents and siblings, before Dad returned to the phone with carefully controlled frustration evident in his voice. Sarah, we have some temporary access issues with our primary accounts due to international travel security protocols, which is exactly why the backup credit access through your accounts is so important for emergency situations. Temporary access issues. Another euphemistic description that avoided acknowledging that they had planned an expensive international vacation while depending on my financial resources for essential travel expenses without discussing this dependency with me in advance or including me in the vacation that my financial support was helping to fund. So the emergency that requires my credit access is that you planned a vacation you couldn't afford independently. That's an unfair characterization of the situation, Sarah. We have the financial capacity for this vacation, but international travel involves complex payment processing that sometimes requires backup options for smooth execution. Your credit access was never intended as primary funding for vacation expenses. The distinction between primary funding and backup options was meaningless, when the backup options were essential for completing travel that had been planned without adequate independent financial preparation. If my credit access wasn't primary funding, then they should be able to complete their vacation without it. If they couldn't complete their vacation without it, then it was functionally primary funding regardless of how it was categorized. Dad, if you have adequate financial capacity for this vacation independent of my credit access, then you can complete the trip using those resources. If you can't complete the trip without access to my credit lines, then you've planned a vacation that exceeds your independent financial capacity. The logic was simple and irrefutable, which probably explained why Dad's response shifted from lawyer negotiation mode to paternal authority mode, a tactical change that had been effective for managing my compliance throughout my childhood and young adult years. Sarah, I'm disappointed that you're choosing to create family conflict rather than helping us resolve what should be a simple technical issue. This kind of rigid thinking doesn't serve anyone's interests, and it's particularly inappropriate when it affects family experiences that can't be rescheduled or replaced. The disappointment strategy was a familiar family management technique designed to make me feel guilty for maintaining boundaries rather than encouraging me to continue advocating for appropriate treatment. It had been highly effective for years, because my desire to avoid disappointing family members was stronger than my commitment to protecting my own interests and boundaries. But the current situation had provided sufficient clarity about family dynamics that paternal disappointment no longer carried the same emotional weight it had when I was less aware of how family relationships had been structured around my accommodation of everyone else's convenience. I understand you're disappointed, Dad. I'm disappointed that my family planned an elaborate European vacation without including me while depending on my financial resources to fund aspects of the trip. I'm disappointed that when I established reasonable boundaries around my credit access, the family response was immediate crisis calls rather than acknowledgement that the underlying financial arrangements were inappropriate. Tyler's voice became audible in the background, apparently having taken the phone from Dad with the characteristic urgency he brought to situations where his immediate needs weren't being met quickly enough. Sarah, this is crazy. You're ruining our family vacation over some kind of weird power trip about credit cards and vacation planning. I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this. His characterization of my boundary setting as a power trip was particularly ironic, given that the current crisis had resulted directly from my family's assumption that they could exercise power over my financial resources without my explicit consent, while excluding me from the family experiences those resources were supporting. Tyler, I'm curious about your perspective on this situation. Do you think it's appropriate for family members to have access to my credit lines without clear terms or time limits? Do you think it's reasonable for me to be excluded from family vacation planning, while my financial resources are used to support that vacation? I mean, the credit card thing has always just been for emergencies and security, not like we're buying cars or houses or anything major. And the vacation thing isn't personal, Sarah. It's just that family trips work better when everyone involved has similar schedules and priorities and stuff. The casual dismissal of systematic access to my financial resources as not anything major revealed how completely Tyler had normalized arrangements that involved thousands of dollars of credit capacity without formal documentation or clear boundaries. The emergency access that was supposed to be temporary and limited had become routine family financial infrastructure that he considered normal and unproblematic. Tyler, how much money have you charged to my credit cards over the past 2 years? I don't know exactly. Not very much. Just normal college stuff and travel expenses and some emergency situations that came up. Mom said you were fine with helping out since we're family and everything. The vague response suggested that Tyler either hadn't tracked his use of my credit access or didn't consider the amount significant enough to require careful monitoring. The assumption that I was fine with unlimited assistance based on Mom's interpretation, rather than direct conversation with me about specific terms and limits, demonstrated how family financial arrangements had been managed through assumptions, rather than explicit agreements. What kinds of emergency situations and travel expenses are we talking about? Just normal stuff, Sarah. Like when my car needed repairs last semester, and spring break trip costs that were higher than I expected, and textbooks that cost more than my budget allowed, and some medical expenses that weren't fully covered by insurance. Regular college emergencies that happen to everyone. The list of regular college emergencies included several expenses that sounded more like lifestyle choices than genuine emergencies, and the total amount was likely significant, despite Tyler's characterization of it as not very much. The pattern suggested that emergency access had been expanded to include any expense that exceeded his personal budget, rather than being limited to genuine, unexpected crises. In the background, I could hear increasingly urgent boarding announcements, and what sounded like airline personnel asking for final passenger confirmation. The timing pressure was escalating exactly as I had anticipated, creating maximum stress for family members who were accustomed to my immediate accommodation of their crisis situations. Mom's voice suddenly came through the phone, tearful and distressed in a way that activated all my deeply conditioned family caretaking instincts. "Sarah, honey, I don't understand what's happening. We're about to miss our flight, and everyone is so upset and confused." This was supposed to be a special family experience, and now everything is falling apart because of misunderstandings about credit cards and planning processes. The emotional appeal was expertly delivered, focusing on family connection and special experiences while minimizing the systematic exclusion and financial manipulation as simple misunderstandings that could be easily resolved through my accommodation. Mom had always been the most effective family member at triggering my guilt and protective instincts, and her distress genuinely affected me despite my intellectual understanding of the manipulation dynamics involved. "Mom, I'm sorry you're upset and that your travel plans are being disrupted. I'm also sorry that you planned this special family experience without including me while depending on my financial resources to support it. Darling, you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. The credit card access is just practical family support that has nothing to do with vacation planning, and the vacation planning is just about creating the right group dynamic for a relaxing experience. These are separate issues that you're connecting inappropriately. The insistence that financial support and vacation exclusion were separate issues ignored the obvious connection between having access to my resources while excluding me from experiences those resources enabled. It was another example of the compartmentalized thinking that allowed my family to benefit from my support while minimizing my inclusion in family decision-making and experiences. If they're separate issues, Mom, then you can handle the vacation using your separate financial resources while I maintain separate control over my credit accounts. Sarah, please don't do this to our family. Your father has been looking forward to this trip for months as a way to celebrate his career transition and spend quality time with the kids before Tyler's senior year. Madison has been so excited about the cultural experiences and the cooking classes. Tyler needs this break before his final year of college pressure. Everyone has put so much emotional investment into this experience. The emotional blackmail was comprehensive and expertly crafted, highlighting each family member's individual investment in the vacation while positioning my boundary maintenance as destructive to everyone's happiness and special experiences. It was designed to make me feel responsible for protecting everyone else's emotional well-being, regardless of how my own boundaries and interests were being treated. I understand that everyone has been looking forward to this vacation, Mom. I've been looking forward to being included in family experiences too. But that wasn't part of your planning process. But you're always so busy with your business clients and those demanding work schedules. We thought you would appreciate not having to coordinate around international travel and all the complexities of group planning. This wasn't meant to exclude you, it was meant to reduce stress for everyone involved, including you. The rationalization reframed my exclusion as thoughtful consideration for my work commitments rather than acknowledging that I had never indicated unavailability for family travel or expressed concerns about international vacation coordination. It was another example of my family making decisions about my preferences without consulting me directly, then presenting those assumptions as facts. Mom, Did anyone ask me whether I wanted to be included in family vacation planning or whether my work schedule would accommodate international travel this summer? The silence that followed was answer enough. But Mom eventually responded with the tone she used when trying to manage family conflicts that had become more complicated than she had anticipated. Well, we discussed it among ourselves and everyone. Felt that your business obligations and travel preferences would make group planning challenging for everyone involved. Everyone meaning the people who participated in the planning conversation that I wasn't included in. The circular logic was perfect. Exclude me from planning conversations, then use my absence from those conversations as evidence that I wouldn't be interested in participating in the planned experiences. So the family made decisions about my availability and preferences without including me in the conversations where those decisions were made. Sarah, you're focusing on process details instead of understanding the underlying family dynamics and consideration that motivated our approach. This is becoming a much bigger issue than it needs to be. Before Mom could continue with her crisis management strategy, I heard what sounded like final boarding announcements and gate personnel making urgent requests for remaining passengers. The airline schedule was creating the time pressure that would force immediate resolution rather than allowing extended family negotiation and manipulation. I need to make a decision right now, Mom. Are you planning to include me in family vacation experiences going forward, or do you prefer to continue planning family activities without my participation? Of course, we want to include you in family activities, Sarah, but inclusion requires flexibility and compromise from everyone involved, and right now you're being very rigid about financial arrangements that were designed to support family experiences. The response confirmed exactly what I had suspected about my family's perspective on inclusion and compromise. My inclusion was conditional on my flexibility and accommodation of their preferences, while their inclusion was automatic and non-negotiable, regardless of how their planning affected my interests or boundaries. Then, you can include me in the conversation about how to handle this current situation. What compromise are you proposing that addresses both your immediate travel needs and my concerns about financial boundaries and vacation exclusion? Sarah, we don't have time for complex negotiations right now. We need immediate resolution so we can board this flight, and we can discuss everything else when we return from vacation. The time pressure was being used to force my immediate accommodation, while deferring any real discussion of underlying issues until after their vacation was completed and the immediate crisis had passed. It was the same pattern that had characterized years of family financial arrangements. Immediate accommodation of family needs with promises of later consideration for my concerns that rarely materialized into actual changes. Mom, I'm not going to restore credit access for this vacation. You'll need to handle your travel expenses using your own financial resources, and we can discuss family planning and inclusion when you return. The phone went silent for several seconds before I heard what sounded like the phone being passed, between family members and urgent whispered conversations about immediate next steps. When someone finally spoke, it was Dad again, this time with the controlled anger he used during challenging business negotiations when accommodation strategies had failed. Sarah, let me be very clear about the consequences of this decision. We're going to miss this flight if we can't resolve payment issues immediately, which means losing thousands of dollars in non-refundable bookings and disappointing everyone who has been looking forward to this experience for months. Are you really willing to be responsible for that outcome? The threat was designed to make me feel responsible for consequences that had resulted from their inadequate financial planning, rather than from my reasonable boundary setting. It was a perfect example of how my family transferred responsibility for problems created by their assumptions and poor planning onto my willingness to rescue them from natural consequences. Dad, I'm not responsible for travel planning that didn't include adequate financial preparation. I'm not responsible for vacation arrangements that depended on my financial resources without my explicit consent. I'm not responsible for managing the consequences of family decisions that I wasn't included in making. The clarity of my position seemed to genuinely shock him, because his response took longer than usual and lacked his typical confident authority. Sarah, I think you're allowing hurt feelings about the vacation planning to cloud your judgment about family financial cooperation that has been working successfully for years. Family financial cooperation suggested mutual benefit and shared decision-making rather than acknowledging the one-sided nature of arrangements that had provided my family with access to my resources while excluding me from family experiences and decision-making processes. What aspects of our family financial cooperation have benefited me over the past 3 years? Another long pause, followed by the sound of urgent boarding announcements that made further conversation impractical regardless of Dad's response. When he spoke again, his voice carried resignation rather than continued negotiation energy. "Sarah, we're going to have to continue this conversation later. We need to deal with immediate travel logistics now." "That sounds like an excellent plan, Dad. You can handle your immediate travel logistics using your own financial resources, and we can discuss family financial cooperation and vacation inclusion when you return." After the call ended, I sat in my kitchen watching the rain intensify outside my windows while processing the complex emotions triggered by the conversation. There was relief at finally establishing clear boundaries around financial arrangements that had been problematic for years. There was satisfaction at refusing to enable family dynamics that had consistently prioritized everyone else's convenience over my interests and boundaries. But there was also genuine sadness about the state of family relationships that had required such dramatic intervention to address fundamental problems with respect and inclusion. My family's immediate response to financial boundaries had been manipulation, guilt, and emotional pressure rather than acknowledgement that their arrangements had been inappropriate or unfair. Over the next hour, my phone buzzed with a series of increasingly frantic text messages as my family attempted to resolve their immediate travel crisis. The messages provided a real-time chronicle of their problem-solving process and revealed significant information about their actual financial preparation for the European vacation. Madison. Sarah, Tyler found some cash, and we're trying to combine credit cards to cover luggage fees, but we're still short for ground transportation. To the hotel. Can you at least unlock one card for today? Tyler. This is so embarrassing. I had to ask other passengers if anyone could exchange cash, and now the gate agents are getting impatient about departure delays. Mom. Honey, your father is trying to call his corporate travel agent to see about emergency credit arrangements. But everything is taking so much time and we're holding up the entire boarding process. Dad. Sarah, I've arranged temporary corporate credit for immediate travel expenses, but this creates tax complications that will require additional paperwork and accounting adjustments. Your inflexibility is creating unnecessary business complications. The messages confirmed that their vacation planning had indeed depended on access to my financial resources for essential travel expenses, despite their claims that my credit access was only for minor emergency backup. Their scramble to find alternative payment methods revealed the extent to which they had incorporated my financial capacity into their planning without explicitly acknowledging that dependency. More importantly, their ability to solve the immediate crisis through alternative arrangements demonstrated that they had sufficient resources for the vacation without my support, despite their claims that removing my credit access would ruin the entire trip. The corporate credit solution that Dad implemented within an hour proved that financial alternatives existed but required more effort and accountability than simply using my resources. By noon, I received a final text from Madison confirming that they had successfully boarded their flight and would be continuing with their vacation using alternative financial arrangements. The message included no acknowledgement of the boundary issues that had prompted the crisis, no appreciation for years of financial support they had taken for granted, and no recognition that their vacation planning had been problematic. Instead, Madison's message focused entirely on the inconvenience I had caused and the stress they had experienced due to my unreasonable timing. We made the flight, but this morning was completely unnecessary drama that could have been avoided if you had communicated your concerns earlier instead of creating a crisis situation. The perspective reversal was complete and predictable. My years of uncomplaining financial support followed by reasonable boundary setting had been reframed as poor communication and crisis creation. Their systematic exclusion from family planning, while depending on my resources, had been minimized as a simple misunderstanding that I had overreacted to dramatically. I found myself appreciating the clarity that crisis situations provided for revealing true family dynamics and priorities. When accommodating my boundaries required effort and accountability from my family members, their response was resentment and blame rather than recognition that their previous arrangements had been unfair and unsustainable. That afternoon, I used the unexpected quiet in my apartment to complete tasks I had been postponing for weeks, while managing family crisis communications and emotional support. Without the constant stream of family messages, requests, and updates that usually filled my weekends, I rediscovered how much mental and emotional energy I typically devoted to maintaining family connections and managing other people's problems. The silence was initially disorienting, like breaking a habitual pattern that had become unconscious routine. But as the day progressed, I began to notice opportunities for activities and interests that had been consistently subordinated to family availability and preferences. I scheduled client meetings that I had been postponing due to family obligations. I researched vacation destinations that appealed to my personal interests rather than group coordination requirements. I contacted friends whose invitations I had declined due to family commitments, and I began planning professional development activities that would require travel during times that were typically reserved for family availability. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based entirely on my own priorities and preferences rather than coordinating around family expectations and emotional management responsibilities. The experience was both liberating and slightly overwhelming, like discovering expanded possibilities that had been invisible while I was focused on accommodation and family harmony. By evening, I had created a comprehensive plan for restructuring my relationships with family members around clear boundaries and explicit agreements rather than assumptions and emotional manipulation. The plan included specific steps for addressing the financial arrangements that had enabled problematic dynamics and clear criteria for evaluating whether family relationships could evolve toward genuine reciprocity. But I also recognized that implementing this plan would require sustained commitment to boundaries, even when family responses included emotional pressure, guilt manipulation, and social consequences designed to restore previous accommodation patterns. The phone call from my cousin Rachel that evening provided perspective I hadn't anticipated about my family's European vacation and the larger patterns of financial dynamics that extended beyond my immediate awareness. Rachel had maintained closer relationships with extended family members than I had over the past few years, and her observations about my parents' and siblings' behavior patterns included information that was both illuminating and disturbing. "Sarah, I heard about what happened at the airport today, and I wanted to check in with you about it. Madison called me this afternoon complaining about credit card problems and family conflicts. But her version of events didn't make much sense. I was curious about what version of the story Madison had shared with extended family members, and whether it bore any resemblance to the actual situation." "What did she tell you?" "According to Madison, you suddenly canceled everyone's credit cards, without warning because you were upset about not being invited on some family vacation, and now everyone thinks you're having some kind of emotional breakdown or financial crisis that's affecting your judgment." The narrative Madison had shared completely inverted the actual dynamics of the situation, portraying my boundary setting as erratic behavior while omitting any mention of the systematic financial arrangements and vacation exclusion that had prompted my response. It was exactly the kind of selective storytelling I should have expected from family members who were accustomed to managing social perception rather than addressing underlying problems. That's an interesting interpretation of the situation, Rachel. What do you think about the idea that family members should have permanent access to someone else's credit accounts without clear terms or time limits? Rachel's response came quickly and with obvious surprise. "Wait, what do you mean permanent access?" I thought the credit card thing was just some kind of temporary emergency arrangement that got mixed up with travel planning somehow. Her surprise confirmed that the extended family was unaware of the systematic financial arrangements that had been operating for years between my immediate family and me. They had been presented with the current crisis as an isolated incident, rather than as the culmination of long-term patterns that had become unsustainable. Rachel, Madison has been an authorized user on my credit cards for 3 years. Tyler has had access for 2 years. Even my parents have been authorized users on my business credit card since a family emergency that was supposed to be temporary. The total credit access was over $60,000. The silence that followed was longer than any pause during my conversations with immediate family members, and when Rachel finally responded, her voice carried genuine shock and concern. "Sarah, that's not emergency assistance. That's basically functioning as a family bank without any formal agreements or protections for you." Her perspective validated what I had been trying to articulate to my family all morning without success. To someone outside the gradual escalation of financial arrangements, the scope and duration of credit access was obviously problematic rather than normal family support. And now they've planned a European vacation that excludes you while depending on those same financial resources for travel expenses. Exactly. The vacation that I'm too busy and work-focused to enjoy apparently requires my credit capacity for successful completion. Rachel's response was immediate and unambiguous. "Sarah, that's not family financial cooperation. That's financial abuse disguised as family support. And the vacation exclusion makes it even more obvious that you're being used rather than appreciated." The term financial abuse had never occurred to me as a description of my family's arrangements. But Rachel's characterization forced me to consider whether the patterns I had been experiencing actually constituted systematic exploitation rather than simply thoughtless family financial management. The conversation with Rachel continued for almost an hour, during which she shared observations about my family's behavior patterns during gatherings and conversations that I had missed, due to my focus on accommodation and conflict avoidance. Her outside perspective revealed dynamics that had been invisible to me while I was participating in them directly. According to Rachel, my parents and siblings frequently discussed their financial challenges and lifestyle desires in ways that assumed my continued support without explicitly acknowledging the extent of that support or expressing genuine appreciation for it. They had been operating as if my financial resources were family resources while maintaining decision-making authority that excluded my input and preferences. More disturbing was Rachel's observation that family conversations about me often focused on my work obsession and social unavailability, rather than recognizing my consistent presence at family events and support during family crises. I had been characterized as absent and difficult even while providing extensive financial and emotional assistance to family members. "Sarah, I think what happened today was overdue boundary setting rather than crisis creation. Your family has been taking advantage of your generosity for years, while treating you like the problematic family member who doesn't participate appropriately in family dynamics." The validation from someone who had observed family interactions without being directly involved in the financial arrangements provided clarity that I hadn't been able to achieve through direct confrontation with family members. My perception of problematic dynamics was accurate rather than oversensitive or misguided. After ending the call with Rachel, I spent the evening reviewing financial records and family communication patterns from the past 3 years, with fresh perspective informed by outside observation. The patterns that emerged were comprehensive and systematic, rather than occasional or incidental. My family had been operating a sophisticated financial support system that depended on my resources while excluding me from decision-making authority and family experiences that my support enabled. The arrangements had been maintained through emotional manipulation, guilt induction, and careful management of social perception that presented me as the problem when I attempted to establish boundaries. But the current crisis had also revealed that alternative financial arrangements were possible when family members were motivated to find them. Their successful resolution of immediate travel logistics proved that my financial support was convenient rather than essential. despite years of being told that my assistance was desperately needed for family financial stability. The recognition that I had been enabling dysfunction rather than providing genuine help was both liberating and deeply unsettling. Years of believing that I was being a supportive family member had actually involved participating in patterns that were unhealthy for everyone involved and particularly exploitative toward me. That night, I made a decision that felt both obvious and revolutionary. I would no longer participate in family financial arrangements that lacked clear terms, explicit agreements, and genuine reciprocity. I would no longer accept exclusion from family decision-making while being expected to provide financial support for the consequences of those decisions. Most importantly, I would no longer prioritize family harmony over my own boundaries and interests, recognizing that harmony achieved through one-sided accommodation was actually systematic dysfunction disguised as family cooperation. The transformation felt like waking up from a long dream about what family relationships should look like to discover what my family relationships actually involved when examined honestly and directly. The transformation that began with canceled credit cards accelerated over the following weeks, as I discovered just how extensively my family had woven my financial resources into their lifestyle expectations. What started as emergency travel funding had evolved into a comprehensive support system that enabled luxury choices they couldn't afford independently, while maintaining the illusion of financial independence. Tuesday morning brought the first surprise when I received a call from Marcus, the manager at the upscale restaurant where my family celebrated every major occasion. His voice carried the diplomatic concern of someone who had handled countless awkward situations involving payment, disputes, and family drama. "Miss Chen, I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but we have a situation regarding the reservation your mother made for next week's anniversary celebration. The credit card she provided for the deposit has been declined, and when we attempted to process the final payment for the private dining room, that transaction was also unsuccessful." The anniversary celebration Mom had mentioned casually during recent family calls was apparently another event that depended on my financial backing, without my explicit knowledge or consent. The private dining room at Marcello's was notorious for requiring substantial deposits and minimum spending commitments that would easily exceed $2,000 for the guest list Mom typically assembled for family celebrations. "I appreciate you calling me directly, Marcus. Can you tell me which credit card was provided for the reservation?" "The account ending in 4782, which I believe has been used for previous family celebrations at our establishment." Mrs. Chen indicated that you handle the family's special event planning and coordination. The card ending in 4782 was one of my primary business credit cards, which had apparently been used for family celebrations without my knowledge for longer than I had realized. Mom's representation that I handled family event planning was news to me, since I was typically informed about family celebrations as an invitee rather than as an organizer or financial sponsor. "Marcus, I'll need you to cancel that reservation and remove my credit card information from your files. Any future family events will need to be planned and funded through their own resources." The silence that followed suggested Marcus had encountered similar family financial complications before and understood the delicate dynamics involved in situations where family event funding was disputed or withdrawn. When he responded, his voice carried professional discretion balanced with obvious concern about the immediate practical problems. "Of course, Miss Chen. I understand these situations can be complicated. Should I contact Mrs. Chen directly about alternative payment arrangements, or would you prefer to handle that communication internally? Please contact her directly and let her know that the reservation has been canceled due to payment issues. She can make new arrangements using her own credit cards if she chooses to proceed with the celebration." After ending the call with Marcus, I realized that my family's financial dependencies extended far beyond the credit card access I had revoked during their European travel crisis. They had been using my accounts for restaurant reservations, eventee, planning, and entertainment expenses that I had never explicitly authorized or been consulted about. The revelation prompted a comprehensive review of my credit card statements and bank records that uncovered a systematic pattern of charges I had never questioned, because they were individually reasonable and often involved family activities I had participated in or family members I wanted to support. But viewed collectively, the pattern revealed thousands of dollars in annual expenses that my family had charged to my accounts while maintaining independent control over decision-making about how money was spent and when family activities were scheduled. I had been functioning as an invisible financial partner in family lifestyle choices while being excluded from meaningful participation in family planning and decision-making. Wednesday afternoon brought the second major discovery when I received a call from Amanda Rodriguez, a travel agent who apparently had been coordinating family vacation planning for the past 2 years, using my credit information for reservations and deposits. Hi, Sarah. This is Amanda from Destinations Unlimited. I wanted to touch base about the Christmas ski trip your family is planning for Aspen. We've been holding the lodge reservation using the card ending in 9134, but when I tried to process the deposit yesterday, the transaction was declined. Christmas ski trip to Aspen. Another family vacation I hadn't been informed about, apparently being planned and funded through my financial resources without my knowledge or consent. The pattern was becoming clear and comprehensive. My family was living a lifestyle that exceeded their independent financial capacity by incorporating my resources into their planning while excluding me from the experiences my funding enabled. Amanda, I wasn't aware of any Christmas ski trip planning, and I need you to cancel any reservations that were made using my credit card information. Oh, that's strange. Your sister Madison worked with me extensively on the planning, and specifically mentioned that you preferred to handle the financial arrangements while she managed the logistics and coordination. The lodge reservation alone was for $8,000, plus equipment rentals and lift tickets for the group. $8,000 for a family ski vacation that I hadn't been invited to participate in or consulted about. Madison had been planning luxury family experiences using my financial capacity, while representing that arrangement as my preferred method of family vacation coordination, rather than acknowledging that I was being excluded from decision-making while providing funding. Amanda, please cancel all reservations immediately and remove my credit card information from your files. Any future family travel planning will need to be coordinated and funded through their own resources. The call with Amanda triggered a systematic investigation of my financial records that revealed the true scope of my family's financial dependency on my resources. Over the past 3 years, they had charged more than $75,000 to my various credit accounts for expenses ranging from routine restaurant meals to elaborate vacation planning, luxury entertainment, and emergency financial assistance that had never been repaid as promised. $75,000. More than my annual salary from 2 years ago, when I was still building my marketing business and struggling to establish financial stability. The amount represented systematic financial exploitation that had been disguised as family support and presented as temporary assistance during challenging circumstances. But the most disturbing discovery was how my family had managed social perception about these financial arrangements. According to Amanda and several other vendors I contacted, I had been consistently presented as the family member who preferred to handle financial arrangements while other family members managed planning and coordination. This narrative made me appear controlling and financially obsessive while concealing the fact that I was being excluded from decision-making about expenses I was funding. My family had found a way to benefit from my financial resources while characterizing me as the problem when vendors or family friends asked questions about payment arrangements and planning dynamics. Thursday morning brought the first direct family response to my boundary setting when Tyler called from Italy, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement about the vacation and carefully controlled anger about the ongoing financial complications. Sarah, this European thing has been amazing. But we need to talk about what's happening with family financial arrangements back home. Mom got a call from that restaurant where we do anniversary celebrations, and now they're saying the reservation is canceled because of credit card problems. The accusatory tone suggested that Tyler viewed the restaurant situation as another example of my unreasonable financial control, rather than recognizing it as a natural consequence of my family's unauthorized Use of my accounts for expenses I hadn't agreed to cover. Tyler, did you know that Mom has been using my business credit card to make restaurant reservations without discussing it with me first? I mean, I knew you usually handled the payment stuff for family events, but I figured that was because you're good at managing financial details and organizing that kind of thing. Mom said you preferred to coordinate family event planning since you have more flexible business accounts. The misrepresentation was consistent with what I had learned from other vendors about how my family characterized our financial arrangements. They had created a narrative that made my funding appear to be my preference, rather than acknowledging that they were depending on my resources for lifestyle choices they couldn't afford independently. Tyler, when did I ever indicate that I preferred to handle family event planning, or that I wanted to coordinate financial arrangements for celebrations I wasn't involved in organizing? I don't know the exact conversations, but that's always been how it worked. You handle the money stuff, and Mom and Madison handle the planning and coordination. Everyone has different strengths and responsibilities in family activities. The division of responsibilities Tyler described sounded reasonable in theory, but was actually a sophisticated arrangement that gave my family control over decision-making about how money was spent while assigning me responsibility for providing the money without meaningful input into family planning processes. What if I don't want to handle the money stuff for family activities that I'm not involved in planning or decision-making about? Tyler's response came after a longer pause than usual, suggesting that the possibility of me opting out of financial responsibility for family activities was genuinely surprising rather than an option he had previously considered. I guess that would make family event planning more complicated since everyone would have to coordinate their own financial contributions and payment arrangements instead of having one person handle everything efficiently. The characterization of my financial control as efficient coordination, rather than acknowledging it as systematic funding of family lifestyle choices, was another example of how my family had reframed exploitation as convenience. They had convinced themselves that using my resources was better for everyone, rather than recognizing it as an arrangement that primarily benefited them. Tyler, how much money do you think you and Madison and Mom and Dad have charged to my credit accounts over the past 3 years? I really don't know specific numbers, Sarah. That's always been your area of responsibility and expertise. Why are you asking about amounts now instead of just handling whatever payment issues need to be resolved? His response confirmed that my family had been completely disconnected from the financial reality of their lifestyle choices, treating my accounts as unlimited family resources without tracking or acknowledging the amounts involved. The money they spent was my responsibility to manage, but they considered the actual amounts to be details they didn't need to concern themselves with. Tyler, the total amount is over $75,000. That's more than most people's annual salaries, and it's been charged to my accounts for family activities and expenses that I wasn't involved in planning or authorizing. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear street noise from whatever Italian location Tyler was calling from, along with what sounded like Madison and my parents having an animated conversation in the background about restaurant recommendations and afternoon planning. That seems like a lot when you put it that way, but it's been spread over 3 years, and most of it was for family activities that everyone participated in and enjoyed. It's not like anyone was buying personal luxury items or anything selfish. The rationalization that family activities justified unlimited financial contributions ignored the fundamental problem that I had been excluded from planning those activities while being expected to fund them. The $75,000 had been spent on experiences that my family controlled and benefited from while treating my financial contribution as automatic and unlimited. Tyler, how many of those family activities that I allegedly participated in and enjoyed were ones that I was actually included in planning or decision-making about? I'm not sure I understand the question, Sarah. Family activities are planned as group experiences, and everyone contributes what they can in different ways. You contribute financial resources, and other people contribute time and planning and coordination. The answer revealed how completely Tyler had accepted the narrative that my funding was simply a different type of contribution, rather than recognizing it as a systematically unequal arrangement where I provided financial resources, while other family members maintained control over decision-making and planning. What happens when I stop contributing financial resources for family activities that I'm not involved in planning? Tyler's response took longer this time, and I could hear muffled conversation in the background that sounded like him discussing the question with other family members before returning to the phone with obvious frustration and confusion. I don't know why you would want to make family activities more difficult and expensive for everyone when the current system works fine and has been successful for years. It seems like you're creating problems where none existed before. The perspective that I was creating problems by establishing financial boundaries revealed how thoroughly my family had internalized their dependence on my resources as normal and appropriate, rather than recognizing it as an unsustainable arrangement that needed to be addressed. After ending the call with Tyler, I realized that my family's response to financial boundaries was going to be consistent denial that their arrangements were problematic, rather than acknowledgement that they needed to restructure their lifestyle expectations around their own financial capacity. They had been living above their means for years by incorporating my resources into their financial planning while maintaining decision-making authority that excluded my input and preferences. Any attempt to change those arrangements would be characterized as me being difficult and unreasonable rather than them being financially dependent and exploitative. Friday afternoon brought the call I had been expecting from Dad, his voice carrying the carefully controlled tone he used for difficult business negotiations that required diplomatic resolution of complex disputes. "Sarah, we need to discuss what's been happening with family financial arrangements while we've been traveling. I've been getting calls from vendors and service providers about payment issues that are creating unnecessary complications and social awkwardness." The characterization of payment issues as unnecessary complications rather than natural consequences of unauthorized account usage was exactly the response I had anticipated from Dad's legal and business background. "Hi, Dad? Which specific payment issues are you referring to? The restaurant reservation for your mother's anniversary celebration, the travel agent cancellation for Christmas planning, and apparently several other service providers have been contacting family members about credit card declines and account access problems. All of those payment issues involve charges to my credit accounts for family activities that I wasn't consulted about or included in planning. The vendors were contacting family members because you've been using my financial resources without my knowledge or consent." Dad's response came with the measured patience he used when explaining complex legal concepts to clients who didn't understand the sophisticated aspects of business relationships and contractual arrangements. "Sarah, family financial cooperation doesn't require formal consultation about every transaction when there's an established pattern of shared resource management that has been working successfully for years. The important thing is overall family financial stability and efficient coordination of shared expenses. Shared resource management suggested mutual benefit and equal access rather than acknowledging that the resources were mine, and the management was entirely controlled by family members who excluded me from decision-making while depending on my funding. Dad, what resources have other family members shared with me over the past 3 years?" The question seemed to catch him off guard, because his response took longer than usual and lacked his typical confident analysis of family relationship dynamics and mutual support patterns. Family resource sharing takes many different forms, Sarah. Financial contributions are just one aspect of family cooperation that includes emotional support, time investment, planning coordination, and various other types of assistance that contribute to overall family well-being. The response was carefully constructed to avoid acknowledging that financial contributions were systematically one-sided, while other types of family contributions were distributed among family members in ways that gave everyone except me meaningful decision-making authority and control over family planning. What specific planning coordination or time investment have other family members contributed to my well-being or personal projects over the past 3 years? Dad's answer revealed the fundamental inequality in family resource sharing arrangements that had been disguised as mutual cooperation and support. Your family provides emotional support and social connection that contributes to your overall quality of life and professional success. Family relationships are about more than quantifiable exchanges of specific resources or services. The argument that family relationships transcended quantifiable exchanges was compelling in theory, but ignored the reality that my financial contributions were extremely quantifiable while the reciprocal benefits I received were vague and difficult to measure or verify. Dad, emotional support and social connection are definitely important aspects of family relationships. But those benefits should be mutual rather than being provided in exchange for systematic financial support that other family members control without my input. I think you're overcomplicating family dynamics by applying business-style analysis to relationships that function based on love, trust, and long-term mutual benefit, rather than short-term transactional exchanges. The characterization of my boundary setting as business-style analysis was designed to make my concerns appear inappropriately commercial and calculating rather than recognizing them as reasonable expectations for respect and reciprocity in family. Financial arrangements. Dad, what long-term mutual benefit do I receive from providing $75,000 in financial support for family activities that I'm excluded from planning while other family members maintain control over decision-making about how my money is spent? The direct question about mutual benefit seemed to genuinely challenge Dad's framework for understanding family financial dynamics, because his response was less confident and more defensive than his usual authoritative explanations. Family financial arrangements are complex, Sarah, and I think you're focusing on specific dollar amounts rather than understanding the broader context of family support and cooperation that benefits everyone involved in different ways. The evasive response confirmed that Dad couldn't identify specific ways that family financial arrangements benefited me, while I was providing systematic funding for family lifestyle choices that exceeded their independent financial capacity. Our conversation continued for another 20 minutes, during which Dad attempted various strategies for convincing me to restore previous financial arrangements without acknowledging that those arrangements had been systematically unfair and unsustainable. His approaches included appeals to family harmony, reminders of family loyalty expectations, and warnings about potential social consequences of disrupting established family financial cooperation. But none of his arguments addressed the fundamental problem that I had been functioning as a family financial resource while being excluded from family decision-making authority and meaningful participation in experiences my funding enabled. After ending the call with Dad, I realized that my family's resistance to changing financial arrangements was going to be comprehensive and persistent, rather than involving acknowledgement of problematic dynamics and willingness to establish more equitable patterns. They had been benefiting from my financial support for years, while characterizing me as the family member who was difficult to include in planning and coordination due to my work obsessions and scheduling inflexibility. The BT narrative that made me appear problematic also justified their exclusion of me from decision-making while maintaining their access to my resources. Changing those dynamics would require sustained commitment to boundaries, even when family responses included social pressure, guilt manipulation, and characterization of my reasonable expectations as unreasonable demands that threatened family harmony and cooperation. Saturday morning brought an unexpected call from my Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister who lived in California, and maintained limited contact with family members due to her own complicated history with family financial dynamics and boundary issues. Sarah, honey, I've been hearing interesting stories about European vacations and credit card cancellations, and I wanted to check in with you about what's really happening with family relationships back there. Her voice carried the knowing tone of someone who had navigated similar family financial complications and understood the sophisticated manipulation strategies that could be disguised as normal family cooperation and support. Hi, Aunt Patricia. What stories have you been hearing? According to your mother, You've been having some kind of financial control issues that are affecting family planning and creating unnecessary drama about vacation arrangements and celebration coordination. The characterization of my boundary setting as financial control issues was consistent with how my immediate family had been framing the situation to extended family members and social connections. That's an interesting interpretation of recent events. What do you think about family members having unlimited access to someone else's credit accounts without formal agreements or clear boundaries? Patricia's response came immediately, and with obvious recognition of dynamics she had apparently experienced during her own interactions with family financial arrangements. "Oh, honey, that sounds familiar. Your parents tried similar financial cooperation arrangements with me about 15 years ago, and it took me way too long to recognize that I was being used as a family ATM while being excluded from decision-making about family activities and planning." Her perspective provided historical context that I hadn't been aware of about family patterns that extended beyond my immediate experience with financial manipulation and control. What happened when you established boundaries around family financial arrangements? Complete family drama, social pressure, guilt manipulation, and about 2 years of being characterized as selfish and difficult before everyone adjusted to the new reality and found alternative financial arrangements for their lifestyle choices. Patricia's experience confirmed what I was beginning to understand about the likely trajectory of family responses to my boundary setting and the persistence that would be required to maintain new arrangements despite emotional pressure and social consequences. The conversation with Patricia continued for almost an hour, during which she shared detailed insights about family financial dynamics and manipulation strategies that helped me understand both the sophistication of arrangements I had been participating in and the predictable patterns of resistance I could expect as I continued establishing boundaries. Most importantly, Patricia's experience demonstrated that family financial exploitation could be successfully addressed through consistent boundary maintenance, even when initial family responses included significant emotional pressure and social consequences designed to restore previous accommodation patterns. Sunday evening, I received the final family communication of the week when Madison called from Rome with a tone that combined vacation excitement with carefully managed frustration about ongoing financial complications that were affecting family planning and coordination. "Sarah, we need to resolve this credit card situation when we get back because it's creating ongoing problems for family financial coordination and event planning that affects everyone's social calendar and activity. Planning. The assumption that resolution would involve restoring my accommodation of family financial arrangements, rather than establishing new patterns based on their independent financial capacity, revealed how little my family understood about the fundamental changes I was implementing. Madison, what specific changes are you proposing for family financial coordination that would address the boundary and inclusion issues that prompted my decision to revoke credit access?" "I'm not sure what you mean by boundary and inclusion issues." "Sarah, the financial arrangements we've had have been working successfully for years, and everyone has been comfortable with how resource sharing and coordination have been handled." The response confirmed that Madison either genuinely didn't understand the exclusion and exploitation dynamics that had characterized our family financial arrangements, or was deliberately avoiding acknowledgement of those patterns in order to maintain previous accommodation expectations. "Madison, do you think it's appropriate for family members to be excluded from vacation planning while their financial resources are used to fund aspects of that vacation?" The European trip planning wasn't about exclusion, Sarah. It was about creating the right group dynamic for a relaxing family experience. And the financial arrangements were just practical coordination that didn't need to involve complex group decision-making. The distinction between exclusion and group dynamic optimization was meaningless when the result involved my family planning and funding luxury experiences, while deliberately preventing my participation and input. Our conversation continued with Madison attempting various approaches for convincing me to restore previous financial arrangements, including promises of improved communication about family planning, offers to include me in future vacation coordination, and assurances that family financial cooperation would be more transparent and mutually beneficial going forward. But none of her proposed solutions addressed the fundamental problem that family financial arrangements had been systematically unfair and exploitative, or acknowledged that my boundary setting was justified rather than problematic behavior that needed to be managed and accommodated. After ending the call with Madison, I realized that my family's approach to resolving our current conflict was going to focus on restoring previous arrangements with minor modifications rather than acknowledging that those arrangements were fundamentally problematic and needed to be completely restructured around genuine reciprocity and mutual respect. They were treating my boundary setting as a temporary crisis that could be resolved through negotiation and compromise, rather than recognizing it as a permanent change in how I was willing to participate in family financial relationships. That recognition was both liberating and sobering, because it meant that establishing healthy family boundaries was going to require sustained resistance to sophisticated manipulation strategies rather than simple conversation and mutual understanding about improved cooperation patterns. But the clarity about family dynamics that had emerged from the current crisis had also revealed possibilities for authentic relationships based on genuine reciprocity rather than the one-sided accommodation that had characterized my family interactions for years. For the first time since my grandmother's death 5 years ago, I felt confident about my ability to maintain boundaries around family relationships while building a life based on my own priorities and values, rather than constant accommodation of other people's expectations and convenience. The European vacation crisis had been a catalyst for recognizing patterns that had been limiting my autonomy and growth for years, while disguising exploitation as family cooperation and love. The transformation that began with canceled credit cards was continuing into comprehensive restructuring of how I understood family relationships and my own responsibility for maintaining boundaries around respect and reciprocity. As my family's vacation continued without the financial crisis they had initially anticipated, I was beginning to understand that my most important inheritance wasn't the financial resources they had been depending on, but the recognition that healthy relationships require mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation disguised as family cooperation and support. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.